Welcome back to Stab the Dragon Productions, episode number 154, book review number 17. I review both fiction and nonfiction, otherwise known as history books, and today is February 8th, 2024. We're going to be looking at The Hobbit, or at least a tiny portion of The Hobbit. This may be part one with possibly more to follow. I don't know. This is my favorite book, after all, after the Bible. When you combine it with Lord of the Rings, definitely. My wife and I just did a read along together this past year, and we have finished it, so I wanted to just record a few thoughts as kind of an intro to the book. And now I know there are hundreds of websites, podcasts, and YouTube videos out there on the subject, so I'm just tossing my 2 cents worth in to join the crowd. So, The Hobbit, or There and Back Again by Bilbo Baggins of Bag End, Underhill, Hobbiton, the Shire. Translated by JRR Tolkien in 1937, revised in 1951 and 66, and a couple of other revisions along the way. This copy is published in Boston by Mariner Books, Houghton Mifflin Harcourt. This is the 75th anniversary edition. And I got the paperback version here so I could take it easily in my briefcase to work. But I've also got the annotated Hobbit here. And this is a marvelous resource if you've never handled this and you're a fan of The Hobbit or Tolkien. I highly recommend it. This is just an amazing resource. But this time around, I've read this one. I probably read it 10 times over the years. Yeah, I would guess 9 or 10 times. And the first time that I read The Hobbit would have been in the early 1970s when I was junior high school. So 14 to 15 maybe. I'm certainly no expert in Middle Earth or Hobbitology or Tolkien studies. I'm more than a casual fan, however. And this video is really just for fun to see if I can add a little bit to Hobbitology and maybe gain some practical applications from the book. The very name of this YouTube show, StabtheDragon Productions, comes from this book. One of the things about the book that strikes me is that it falls within a genre I have seldom read, fantasy. I'm much more into science fiction, history, theology, current events, all that. But this book seems to touch on all genres in a lot of ways. And maybe that's one reason why I like it so much. It is clearly, I think, an epic. There's a poetic element to it, and certainly lots of poetry within it. Tolkien was a poet. The Hobbit seems to have universal appeal, being translated into over 60 languages, and has well over 100 million books in print. The 3-part movie series by Peter Jackson was a huge worldwide success. The professional literary critics of 20 or 30 years ago or so hated it. I mean, I read some of the reviews. They hated its popularity. They felt it to be common or something. But now I think being continuously in print for 80 years or so, it's considered a classic, and rightfully so. And it consistently shows at the top of the charts for people's favorite books. So I think the critics have to take it seriously now. It was originally considered a children's story, of course, yet it was written at such a depth that it quickly outgrew the children's label and really almost single-handedly started the fantasy genre. I mean, I know there's antecedents to the fantasy genre, but I mean that this book really kicked that genre off. I know that Terry Brooks' series, the Sword of Shannara series, took off in the, I don't know if it's the early 70s when he started writing his series. So that's kind of a very similar thing, but hey, that's 40 years, 35, 40 years after Tolkien was writing. The book has clearly it reflects Tolkien's Christian worldview. He was a committed Roman Catholic. So he does have theological themes throughout, but they're done subtly. I mean, he's not definitely preachy. There's nothing direct, there's no Bible quotes or anything like that. But, if you start digging into the things that he says, the philosophy that's there, you'll see his Christian worldview. So yeah, it's got a philosophical bent. He seeks to study the meaning of life. What is of true value? What is the good, the just, and the beautiful? But this is, on its surface, overtly an adventure story where there's a quest, there's danger, struggle, combat, and even death. There are orcs and elves, dwarfs and trolls, so it's, similar to some fairy tales as well. I mean, Tolkien wrote it specifically along those lines because of all of the old poems and fairy tales that he read as a child. The book is full of nature's wonder. Well, at least the nature of Middle-earth's wonder, at any rate. But Tolkien himself did love nature. He had a deep affection for the beauty of the English countryside, particularly trees. As a young man, he went hiking all throughout England, and then in Europe, he saw the beautiful Alps up close. And it shows in his stories in the mountains, or his love for trees shows up in the stories. The story satisfies at a deep level because though it is a piece of fiction, it really does have the ring of truth about it, as well as another ring. Tolkien knows how to describe the details of nature so that he can evoke certain moods and feelings and even memories from his readers. He uses geography and nature well to set up individual stories in the book so that you might say certain parts of nature are themselves characters in the book. Mirkwood is a perfect example of a piece of geography that comes alive and is mysterious and even malevolent. When I open my 75th anniversary edition here, I'm greeted with a map. Right here, there's a map. This is Thror's map, the map carried by Thorin Oakenshield, drawn by Tolkien. The Lonely Mountain is featured here. And notice that there's also a little drawing of Smaug the dragon up there on top of the mountain. And then down here you've got spider webs and Mirkwood, right? So this map, I love maps. As a kid, I grew up with we had a family atlas. We had the World Book Encyclopedia. We'd go on road trips in the 60s and 70s, and we had paper maps that were folded up. Right, you could get them at any gas station. So I loved reading maps, and then so reading The Hobbit brought back some of those fond memories of looking at maps as a child, of family travels, and so feelings of adventure, of discovery, of traveling in unknown lands. All of that was part of my childhood. So the maps drawn by Tolkien here are valuable. The story itself draws heavily from his studies in English history and medieval literature. He actually studied Old Norse. He learned Old Norse and drew names heavily from the Poetic Edda of Iceland. Smaug the dragon seems to come maybe from Beowulf to an extent. Ancient maps and lore, names and old languages, all these come alive in Tolkien's imagination, and he puts it on the printed page. Tolkien himself was homeschooled by his mother in his earliest childhood, and part of that curriculum was art. It was crucial. Back then, there were no cell phones, and cameras were large, expensive affairs, still halfway experimental. So if you wanted to record what you saw in nature, you drew it or painted it. And when you read Tolkien's biography, you see the value that he placed on the nature scenes of his youth and how he wasn't a fan of the busy, noisy, industrialized cities. His affection for nature and his drawing of nature, these are essential parts of The Hobbit. In chapter 1, it's titled An Unexpected Party. So it opens the story, but look at that first line. In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. Not a nasty, dirty, wet hole, filled with the ends of worms and an oozy smell. It was a hobbit hole, and that means comfort. Now, many authors include things and people and events from their life and their stories. Fitzgerald and The Great Gatsby are a great example, but Tolkien was a master at it. Most people don't realize that Tolkien was a soldier, and he was an officer in the British Army during World War I. And he spent time in the trenches. He lived in a hole in the ground, and it was muddy, unclean, very dangerous. The opposite of a hobbit hole. We find that this hobbit was of the family named Baggins, and they were well-to-do, rich, and respectable because they never had adventures or did anything unexpected. Notice again the title of the chapter, An Unexpected Party. If being respectable meant not doing the unexpected, here on page 1 we have the introduction of the inner conflict that this story is all about. Not staying within the comfortable bounds of what is expected, rather stepping out into the unexpected and having an adventure. This creates the tension for the whole story. Well, we made it all the way through page 1. And that's all for now on this episode of Stab the Dragon. We may return to The Hobbit. It may be several months or a year before I return to it. But this is my favorite book, so I want to think about it some. Well, that's all for tonight. In hoc signo vinces. Out here.